Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. It is Friday, January 31st, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. I'm speaking today with reporter Amy Spiro, who has been filling in as diplomatic correspondent for the last few weeks. Hi, Amy. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Very glad to have you here. And what a few weeks it has been for you as diplomatic correspondent, right? It is day 483 of the war. 2 of the Israeli hostages and 5 of the Thai hostages who were released yesterday amid total mayhem in Khan Yunis. And there was also Agam Berger, who is the 5th of the 5 surveillance soldiers who was also released home earlier in the day. So that's a total of 8 hostages released yesterday. And the release of Agam Berger really closed a circle for those 5 young women and their families. We'll talk about some of the details of the releases, the visit of Trump Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff, who's in the region, and what will happen now with the second stages of the ceasefire and hostage talks. And of course, we'll also talk about 3 more hostages who should be released tomorrow on Saturday. We'll get into all of it after a quick break. Okay. So, Amy, yesterday's scenes, of course, were terrifying and gut-wrenching. I'm talking about the 2 hostages that were released in Khan Yunis and the 5 Thai hostages. Agam Berger, as I said, the 5th of the 5 surveillance soldiers, was released earlier in the day and dressed in army fatigues, paraded on a stage. She bravely waved, certificate in hand, before she was handed off to the Red Cross. But then there was Arbel Yehoud, 29, paraded through a terrifying mob of Gazans, of Islamic Jihad, Hamas, really pressing in on her from all sides, as well as Gadi Mozes, 80, both by chance from kibbutz near Oz. And then 5 Thai workers were released. And their names are, and forgive me if my pronunciation is a little bit off, we had Pongsak Thenna, Sathian Suwannakham, Watchara Sriaoun, Bannawat Seathao, and Surasak Lamnau. They were all walked through this mob, eventually to safety. So take us through the morning and afternoon of reporting on these releases and what you were looking at over the course of those hours.
Yeah, so it started with Agam Berger. She was released earlier in the morning. Hamas again played this sort of sick little game where they force her into this fake uniform, despite the fact that she was kidnapped in her pajamas, force her onto the stage, make her wave, give her this, ridiculous certificate, make her wear this lanyard, etc. And then she was pretty quickly, handed over to the Red Cross, brought to IDF troops and brought out of Gaza. And then there was a delay where we were all sort of waiting for Arbel and for Gadi and for the 5 Thai hostages who we didn't even know, at that point, if they were going to be in Khan Yunis, if they were going to be elsewhere. It wasn't clear. Israel wasn't told where that handover was happening. It's worth noting that the 5 Thai hostages were not part of the deal. They're not. Israel did not release any prisoners in reciprocity for them. It was not a part of the framework deal that was agreed to. This was a separate deal that was made, essentially with Thailand. I saw, a report yesterday that Turkey was involved. But Israel is still obviously accepting them, treating them, bringing them back, taking responsibility for them. So we were waiting for that as well. There was a delay. We were all sort of, it felt like the whole country was sort of watching this scene in Khan Yunis and not understanding what was happening. And then eventually, after a long time of these vans sitting there, so Arbel was the first to be brought out in really this sort of awful scene where she's completely surrounded by masked Hamas gunmen and everyone's shoving on every side and screaming. And, it would obviously she suffered so much for 15 months. And then to see this scene and, similarly with Gadi and then with the 5 Thai hostages. And Israel was understandably furious and essentially said, this can't go on. We're going to delay the release of the prisoners, right? There were 110 Palestinian prisoners who were released yesterday until, the mediators are going to guarantee that things like this are not going to happen again. And essentially, the delay was about 3 hours. Netanyahu later put out a statement saying, we've received a guarantee from the mediators that this won't happen, and it'll be a safe passage. So, it'll be all eyes tomorrow on another 3 being released and what the situation will look like and how much Hamas can control the crowds and wants to control the crowds. So it'll definitely be something to look for. And, the reason we even had a release yesterday was that Israel, lodged a protest when Arbel was not released in the last group. She's a civilian, so they were waiting on her to be freed, and we ended up with this sort of interim release that wasn't originally part of the deal. So Israel is making its thoughts clear, and we'll see what happens moving forward.
What do we know about tomorrow's release, which is meant to be 3 hostages? One is meant to be American. What have you been hearing, Amy?
Yeah, so at this point, we're waiting. Hamas has to release the names at some point later today. They've generally been doing that around sort of 5, 6 p.m., but we don't really know. Steve Witkoff, who's the Trump envoy, said yesterday that there'll be an American coming out. The assumption is that will be Keith Siegel. He's the oldest of the 3 living American hostages. And at this point, we're only talking about releasing the living. So that's the assumption. There were a lot of reports in American media that he was going to be freed yesterday. That obviously didn't happen. So a lot of people are assuming that. Otherwise, the assumption is it's going to be 3 men, likely 3 men who are either older or are unwell. On the list of the 33, right, and on the list of, those who are still in the 33 who haven't been freed yet, right, are also Avera Mengistu and Hisham al-Sayed, who are Israeli citizens who have been in Gaza for, I believe it's more than a decade by now. Obviously, serious concerns for their health. We don't know. Israel has said essentially that 25 of the 33 are alive, which means 8 are not. They have not named those 8. Of course, Hamas has said in the past that the Bibas family, that Ali Shiri and the children are not alive. And we've seen also, Israel made a fuss that Arbel Yehoud was not released as a civilian, and Shiri has not really been discussed. So they're not officially been considered dead by Israel, but unfortunately, we're just working with that assumption. So I saw a report yesterday that Yarden Bibas might be released this week or next week. Again, we just don't know until Hamas decides.
Which is such a hard concept to even wrap your head around. Yeah.
Yes.
That he would be coming home without his family, if he would be coming home. Yeah.
Nothing about this is easy. Arbel Yehoud, who was released yesterday, her family asked for privacy, and most of the hostages, we've seen videos of them reuniting with their family, and then we didn't get anything from that from Arbel's family. We also don't know if she knows that her brother was killed on October 7th. We don't know if she knew that her boyfriend is still a hostage. So we don't really know what she's gone through for 15 months. And, we are granting her that privacy. And according to the report, she was essentially alone. And she was not held by Hamas. She was held by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So we really don't know much, obviously, granting her that privacy. So everyone who comes out, also Gadi, by the way, we don't know if Gadi knew. We think he did because he spoke a lot about hearing his family members on the radio and then TV, but his longtime partner was killed on October 7th, Efrat.
Right. And did he know that before, or did he just find out yesterday? Right.
Right. It's not clear. So everyone who's coming back is not just dealing with, 15 months of horror, but also in, what happened on October 7th and what they know and what they don't know.
Yeah. Let's talk for a moment more about the Thai hostages. As you noted, we didn't know, they were not part of the original deal, and they were sort of tacked on, thank goodness. There is one, as far as I know, one Thai hostage living, still left in Gaza, and 2 who were killed in captivity, whose bodies need to be brought back. And there's been I've seen a lot of discussion on social media about the fact that they were not named, just like as Arbel Yehoud was, or as Agam Berger was. And I happen to have gone out to Kibbutz Alumim a few times in the last few weeks to talk to Thai workers who were there on October 7th and were terribly attacked and hid under cow dung and crazy, crazy situations that they described. But one of the things they also told me, they came back because they were still within their 5-year work visa and they need to earn money in order to send that money back home. But that even though they didn't necessarily know who were the other Thai hostages held in Gaza. They couldn't name them. They didn't necessarily know them. And part of that, as I was sort of discussing it with them and with their Israeli kibbutz supervisors, is that they're great workers and they are very dedicated to what they do, but they don't necessarily share a lot about their culture, including the embassy. The embassy did not want to talk to me about the Thai hostages. And I wanted to ask you, in other words, when did we finally find out who were the Thai hostages who were released? Even though we've known what their names are, when did we actually find out who they were?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see, criticism of the Israeli media for saying, you talk constantly about, all the Israelis who are being released and not the Thai hostages. And I definitely understand that, but we are working within a set of limitations. So first of all, as you said, the embassy, not just this week, but for 15 months does not want to talk about it. The embassy actually asked, the Bring Them Home website to take the Thai hostages down from the site. They didn't want them named. It's just they had a different approach than we did. They, had a different perspective. And so we respected that. And then in terms of the release yesterday, we weren't told. So the reason we knew that Gadi and Arbel and Agam were going to be released is Hamas issued a statement saying Gadi and Agam and Arbel are going to be released, and Israel confirmed that. And Hamas did not name the hostages. So what we knew before yesterday was that there are 8 Thai hostages, right? There are also 2 other foreigners, one Nepali and one Tanzanian who has been declared dead. 8 Thai hostages. 2 of them we knew Israel had said had been killed, were no longer alive. So we have 6 names that are potential, and we were told 5. And that's all we knew. So we had those 6 names, but until essentially they crossed the border back into Israel, and then Israel released a statement naming them, that's when we named them. And that's, when we passed out that information. But again, as you said, the culture is very different. They, for most part, don't want to talk to the media. Some of their families have, some of them haven't. And again, we've respected that the same way we're respecting Arbel's privacy. We have named them. We obviously are extremely glad that they're back. We hope that everyone will be back, including the additional Thai hostage, the bodies, everything. And we provide the information that we have.
Right, exactly. And just one more note on that the hospital where the Thai hostages are being cared for right now, the medical director said that they're in actually fair health despite being kept underground for long periods of time. And she noted that their age, that they're all fairly young, and that could be a reason why they're in good health. So thank goodness for that. And may everyone just return to health and rehabilitation. Okay, let's take a quick break. When we're back, we'll look at some of the political ramifications of all of this. Netanyahu heading to D.C., second stage of the talks, so stay with us. Okay, so we have the invite for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu heading to Washington, D.C., essentially next week, presumably to meet with President Donald Trump. And then, of course, we're heading into that 16th day of the ceasefire, and the stage 2 talks are supposed to start. What are you hearing about all of this? And where does it all come together, really, in terms of Netanyahu's visit to the States and the second stage?
Yeah, so Netanyahu's office has said that he will be leaving on Sunday to fly to Washington. He has said that his meeting in the White House with Trump will take place on Tuesday. He's at this point scheduled to come back on Thursday. Things are a little bit up in the air. They always are when Bibi travels. Obviously, you kind of never know what's going to happen. He's also still recovering from prostate surgery, which was a question mark sort of hanging over this trip. But the plan is for him to leave Sunday. So, as I said, his meeting with Trump is on Tuesday. The 16th day, which is under the terms of the deal, essentially the deadline to restart talks on the second stage is Monday. So these are happening at the same time. Gal Hirsch, who is the government's sort of special point person on hostages, released a long statement yesterday in which he explicitly tied these two together. He said it's extremely important that Netanyahu is going to be meeting with Trump when the second stage talks are kicking off. He said, we're preparing for those now. Those are, moving ahead, and it will be happening at the same time. And that's of great importance. So, there have been some talks already. I mean, the Mossad chief and the Shin Bet chief have been in Egypt since the start of the ceasefire. Obviously, there are still conversations going on. I think in terms of the more official, beginning, that will be next week. And Gal has said, they're committed to reaching the further stages. Obviously, we get a lot more mixed messaging from the government and from different members of the government. But for now, that's the expectation.
I thought it was interesting in Gal Hirsch's statement how he was much more forthcoming in a sense than he has been in the past. Almost an apology for the fact that it took so long. Really, it really was kind of an apology. I was wondering your thoughts about that, Amy.
Yeah, he issued a lengthy statement, and he's not someone who's been so forthcoming in the past. Yeah, he did. He said, he said, I'm sorry it took this long. It shouldn't have taken this long. And obviously, that's something that I think most Israelis share, that the idea that we have left all these people in Gaza for so long is very painful. So even with them returning, and obviously the ones who are not returning, it's certainly painful. So, Gal Hirsch, I would say, doesn't get necessarily, I don't know if he has the best reputation among Israelis. I'm not sure people have viewed him with such great honor, perhaps. But I don't think there's denying that he's dedicated to this cause. Obviously, there are limitations and there's, realities in place. But I think he has spent the past 15 months doing what he can.
Right. And one last question I'm going to throw at you, which is Steve Witkoff's meeting with members of Netanyahu's right-wing members of Netanyahu's coalition, which was just, with Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister. I thought that was pretty fascinating. Not so surprising, but what were your thoughts about that he sort of went to those members of the coalition, which, in the past that has not happened with members of the U.S. administration who are visiting in the region?
Yes, it's definitely, as our U.S. correspondent pointed out yesterday, it's definitely a break from the Biden administration, who essentially shunned Smotrich, right? Smotrich is obviously a very far-right member of the government, says a lot of things that, the Biden administration were certainly not happy with. So they, U.S. officials never met with him. Witkoff is in the region. He certainly, again, a departure from his predecessors, right? He went to Gaza, which a U.S. official has not done, I think, in more than a decade. So he held this meeting. He held actually two meetings with Smotrich yesterday, one in the morning that included also Ron Dermer and Aryeh Deri. I think Ron Dermer was largely a translator. But I'm sure he also spoke. Obviously Smotrich is essentially the biggest government obstacle to going ahead to these next stages of the deal. He has, Itamar Ben-Gvir has already left the government. Smotrich has said that he will leave the government if Israel does not return to fighting after the first stage, right? The 42 days of the ceasefire. Witkoff, again, we've seen this Trump administration is just not afraid to do things differently. We'll say we don't know how that's always going to play out. We know that Witkoff played, a pretty significant role in getting this deal to where it got to. And in addition to, those meetings with Smotrich, he met, first of all, he met with the four soldiers who were released a week ago in the hospital. And then he also went to Hostages Square and he met with groups of freed hostages and family members of hostages. And one of the things he said there was that, it's very important to him to, complete the next stages of this deal. One of the reasons is that he believes that, he said, I met with these soldiers and the parents are so, over the moon to have their children back. And he said, even the parents of, the hostages who are no longer alive deserve to bury them. They deserve to have them home, even if it's under worse circumstances. So that's obviously something that is essentially, the last stage of the deal. We're talking about releasing bodies. People that Israel has declared dead would not come until the very end. And therefore, to get that to happen, these next stages have to happen. So if Witkoff is talking to Smotrich, he's obviously, pushing that point. There's so many factors involved, political, diplomatic. The Trump administration is a wild card. We don't know exactly what's going to come out of Trump's mouth. I don't know if Steve Witkoff always knows what Trump is going to say. So there's a lot of question marks hanging over the next few weeks. Obviously, this trip next week, and then, the remaining weeks of the ceasefire before we see what will be moving forward.
Yep. Amy, thank you so much for your thoughts and your comments and summarizing it all for us. It's very much appreciated for this Daily Briefing podcast.
Thank you for having me.
For sure. And thanks to all of you for listening to the Times Visuals Daily Briefing. We'll be back again tomorrow with another installment. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. Any comments you have, you can always drop us an email, podcast@timesofvisual.com. Until next time, take care, be well, and Shabbat Shalom.